Thank you, everybody. Good morning. So we've invited up the three previous speakers, plus two new entrants to the group today. So I'll just quickly do a bit of introduction. Tim Yendell here, who's head of the Choice Programme at Royal Bank of Scotland. Been at the bank, I think, about 6 or 7 years. Very successful programme. You'll hear more about that in a minute. And John Killey, who's head of Asia Pacific and EMEA, and global head of buildings at Citi, and has certainly got a huge amount of experience in this sector. So what we're here to do, and I'll just take my watch off because I think time is inevitable when you've got 6 people on the stage we're going to run over, is quickly run through, with the help of a panel, some research that has recently been done by my company DTZ and Philip's company UnWork. About a year and a half ago, it became very clear as the bank started to recover and ask questions as to what should we do next in the financial workplace, how should we start tapping talent, that perhaps the banks had really had their head in the sand trying to recover and worry about the audit and the risk and everything else that was coming across them. And I thought that we would commission a piece of work around the world, global piece of work, to basically understand what was in the bank's view, what they were thinking and how they were going to move forward in the workplace. And so we, with the help of Philip and his team, commissioned, we basically interviewed 49 banks around the world, including NAB and Citi and HSBC out of Hong Kong, and all the banks here in the UK and a lot across America as well. Over 100 people were interviewed. We had dinners and breakfast and all sorts of nice things like that. And we concluded a report which we're going to quickly run through today. The report is basically the findings of all that work, and what we have really found is that we found sort of 5 forces in the banking sector and in the future of financial workplace, and we've also tried to come up with 7 predictions. And rather than me do all the speaking, what I'm going to try and do is tee up a prediction or tee up a force, and then effectively ask one of the panel members to talk to it or to have a conversation about it. So the first thing we'll do is really just quickly play you a quick video, which you won't be able to see because the panel are now sitting in front of the screen. But just a quick video just to give ourselves some thought on this. Can you play the video, please? Okay, so we're going to quickly, as I said, talk about the forces and predictions. So We talked about this, lots of interviews, come out a report, launch, and we're going to engage with the future. What we have had requests from right around the world is for this not just to be a UK or European report, but actually global. So we are doing a lot of presentations with other banks in both New York, in Chicago, and in Shanghai over the next 6 months. So the 5 forces driving the change. The 5 forces are basically regulation, cost pressure, technology, geography, and talent. And I suppose if you sit back and think to yourself, well, that's pretty obvious, but often defining what the forces are that drive something is difficult, and we hope that today we'll talk about that. So taking each one individually, regulation. So what we found that's been really driving the banks over the last 3 or 4 years, and perhaps may affect what the future of the financial workplace will be going forward, is the first one, which is regulation. And we call this the Daily Mail factor. Now, Monica, for you, and even for our friends from Los Angeles and everyone else, the Daily Mail is a paper in the UK that is best known for basically creating scandal out of nothing. And it's a fairly right-wing paper, and basically a lot of the banks in this country refer to the Daily Mail factor as something that if they do something, they now think about, is it going to cost and everything else, but they go, is it going to pass the Daily Mail factor? So the question I ask, actually, interestingly, and I'll ask Monica first on this, of course, is that we've just seen the most fantastic new headquarters based in Melbourne. The question that we have to consider, and maybe Tim, you can add on to this, is what would happen if Royal Bank of Scotland, the bank that we own, suddenly decided to move into a new, very communicative, collaborative type building? How would the Daily Mail feel about it? And I ask you, how have the press taken the battered banks building a very beautiful building, and how have you overcome that?
I would say for NAB, it wasn't a big bang. It was a gradual journey, and that certainly helped. And of course, any time you're about to purchase or about to go to market to purchase a new property and make that commitment, you are going to have journalists wanting to know the story. And the story was a very honest and transparent story. There was nothing really hidden every time the journalists were knocking on the door. And it was a story around consolidation and around improvement of efficiency, and it was around addressing how businesses are changing the way they work and how employees were working. So that was the party line. It was honest. There was nothing to hide about that. We're not going to be delivering a strategy and saying something alternative to the media or to the market. And the proof is in the pudding. When we did open the building, journalists did come through, and they did do a tour, and they did ask questions, and we were really pleased to know that what they saw was what was written. So we thought that was quite a successful achievement.
Tim, dare I ask how? Tim, you see, for Royal Bank of Scotland, because he's the bank, he doesn't get his own microphone.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what Monica said. I think it would need to be done on the back of some consolidation. Yeah. So there's a kind of a cost initiative involved. That said, though, I think regardless of whether you were doing it for a cost perspective or people perspective, I think certainly the Daily Mail factor would play a part. I mean, we wouldn't want facts to get in the way of a good story, and I think no matter kind of whether you did it for one reason or the other, I'm sure there will be a story to tell in that.
Cool, thank you. Later on, and we'll talk about the predictions. I'll come on to, in regulation, the piece around regulation potentially restricting agile working and everything we're talking about in the last 24 hours. And I think what's interesting is there is a lack of consistency in reading the regulation going around the world. So I would say that the Australians have cracked the regulation in a different way than a lot of the banks here in the UK, and the EMEA have done it. So they have adopted the regulation in a slightly different way, in clearly a conforming way to perhaps some of the banks here who have probably gone over the top the other way. So I think we need, as an industry, to try and find a middle ground. So that was the first of the factors. The second factor is the factor of cost. Now, every year the CEO Forum creates a great survey, and they ask 700, this year it was 734 CEOs, what their most important challenge will be in the next 12 months. A lot of those CEOs are from the banking sector, and as you would imagine, for the last 4 or 5 years, cost has been number one. Interestingly, last year and this year, number one challenge has been talent. Number two has been innovation, and number three has been cost. So cost is moving down the graph, but actually I think the change in the way we look at cost and the way the banks will look at cost will drive a different mentality. Because regulation is now becoming such a big driving force, I think cost will no longer just fall off the agenda, perhaps like it did in the noughties, but will always be on the agenda, and something that we as professionals in this space need to think about. And maybe turn to John to talk about how cost for you is still a driver, even though there's a perception that the banks are coming out of the bad times, etc.
I think it continues to be a key issue, and I think actually it's related to regulation as much as anything else. We're faced with increased expense as a result of regulation. Regulation is something we can't affect because it's externally imposed. Obviously, real estate is something we can influence. And so in that respect, when you're looking at cost pressures, you're always looking for something you can influence, manage, control, and reduce. And so, real estate hits that sweet spot all the time. I think also the other comment you make is in terms of utilisation. I think technology has allowed us to be much cuter in terms of understanding how we use our space or underuse our space. And so consequently, where you have a resource where you can control the expense base and you have a resource that is clearly underutilised, the two tend to come together, and it's an obvious factor in relationship to managing that cost. It has other benefits, which I'm sure you'll come on to in a minute, but those two will still continue to be the case. Will still be a focus for, I think, all the banks, as well as many other organisations. And I think banks are particularly different, but obviously, we're very much in the spotlight, and so it does remain a big driver.
Can I just ask you, while you're on that subject, about the whole nearshoring, offshoring, inshoring, right-shoring? I can't remember, someone yesterday, I think Deutsche Bank's reference to it is Jeannie here? No, she's not, but the Deutsche Bank's reference is just right-shoring. So it's kind of like they got it right. They don't know whether it's near or off, it's just right-shoring. And just wanted, from a Citi point of view, you've been very forthright in moving a lot of staff and people offshore for cost pressures. Where are you in that debate? Are you bringing them back on nearshore?
I'm going to say it's interesting actually. I think right-shoring is the right expression, because when we started this journey, it was a case of let's lift and shift and drop in a low-cost location because we'll save money. And I think that was a relatively short-sighted approach, because just transferring the problems from one location to another and not having the re-engineering opportunities or developing those has meant that you don't really get the benefits you can. What we do have now is we have a policy of actually putting our activities in the right locations. In many cases, in all cases, driven by talent and the capabilities of that market to support it, but also with the added factor that it can reduce our costs. So we have a published target to get to 50% of our workforce in what we call CSEs by the end of 2017. And now bear in mind we've got 250,000 employees. That's a significant proportion of our population. Where are we on that journey? Yes, we realise that we've got a way to go. To get to 50% is going to be a major step change in terms of our movement. I think we're around the 30% mark. But we're seeing the benefits as we do it, because it's not just a case of moving jobs, it's a case of making sure we're moving the right jobs to the right location so we can get benefit from not just the cost benefits but also the talent side.
Okay, thank you. So we talked about regulation, cost pressure. The third force is technology, and the drivers there in terms of the whole, I think it's probably fair to say that the banks have been somewhat behind the times in terms of technology and have probably been caught out by the emergence of new technology in the way you can purchase stuff online, and the whole fintech sector, and even Apple Bank that's now coming up. And who better to turn to talk about this subject, I suppose, in terms of a driving force is Philip himself, who has more gadgets than I've ever, always has a gadget a day. Seems to have lost his pen, his famous gadget pen, but noticed you went writing with it last week when we had lunch. But can you give me a view as to the technology sector and the banking and how that's going to affect the workplace?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think what was the most striking piece of research we read as part of the report was from McKinsey. And you obviously respect hugely what they say, and I think I want to just quote from it. Their study last year on digital banking found that retail banks only digitised 20 to 40% of their processes, and that 90% of European banks invest less than 0.5% of their total spending on digital, 0.5%. But that's quite worrying. If I could have my slides up just for a second, I want to show just three images, because while there's a huge, obviously, problem in investing in digital in European banks, look what is going on. And I love this quote from Morgan Stanley, their chief exec, Jamie Dimon, who said... JP Morgan, sorry, yes. Who said...
They're surrounding us, don't get it wrong.
They're next door, they're behind us. They have a wonderful tower, which you can see around the corner. So you have this statement here in Canary Wharf. And what has he said? The companies in Silicon Valley all want to eat our lunch. And they're coming. Look at what PayPal are doing. Square announced yesterday that they're going to allow Snapchat users to make financial transactions. So the market is just changing dramatically. And if we just click on one slide, James, of course there are disruptors, and the mobile phone that has disrupted photography has disrupted music. And I click on one more. Of course, our friends have now made huge strides towards payments. So the launch of Apple Pay and the integration at long last into the new iPhone of this little symbol here, which is from a technology called Near Field Communication, NFC, means that very soon they're going to disrupt dramatically how we pay each other, how we transact. And you can look globally, M-Pesa in Kenya, now 50% of the adult population are using M-Pesa to make payments. So early adopter markets have had a huge impact. So I think my kind of conclusion is there are huge disruptors coming from technology. And the last point on it is automation. In the report we quoted Oxford University's study that says that 47% of jobs across all sectors will get automated. And Martin at Deloitte just gave me their new report, which looks fascinating earlier today. And in it, they're predicting that 30% of jobs in London are at high risk of automation. So I'm wondering what happens, because we're sitting in Canary Wharf, where there are a lot of jobs in middle and back office functions. Will they be here in the next 15 years? And we heard from Kit Malthouse as to the importance of what we have here to the economy.
Thank you. Go back to the other. Thank you, Philip. A lot to think of, and we'll come back to technology later on. I feel with so many architects on the stage, I need to start to involve them, and great, I think. So I won't bring them in the geography, I'll bring them in the last one, which is perhaps the talent, and maybe ask either John or Monica to talk about the driving of geography around the workplace, and whether it's the community urban environment that is something that's starting to come out as a big player, or whether it's the stability of markets and how people like Citi go into market and how they feel about that market, what happens if it goes wrong, and also the going to different markets for the talent pools. Now, Monica, do you want to just give us a comment on the geography side of the future?
Yeah, I mean, firstly on talent, there's no doubt there is high competition amongst the banks in Australia to achieve the best talent, and particularly targeting the graduates that are coming out of school. And there is much more choice for new and up-and-coming talent as well. So that's something, to be honest, that has been at the forefront of the people and culture team for a very, very long time. It's nothing new necessarily. And it is really making sure that staying true to the values and the position of, in this case, we're now positioning them in the market and making sure they're attuned to what is attracting diversity of the workforce. Geography is an interesting one because I'm not seeing a radical shift, but I am seeing a general momentum from, the community and the employees around wanting to have more choice and wanting to be able to work at locations closer to where they live, particularly in New South Wales, for example, where they are living a bit more remotely to coming into the city. And of course, the spread of network locations are designed such that they are targeting the key rural and suburban locations to have the right presence, if you like, in the community as well. It's part of business, it's part of servicing the customer. So I think there is that natural shift that's going on, and we're predicting that will continue to increase, and in the next 5 to 10 years we'll have more of a distributed hub and spoke, if you like, that terminology solution for where work actually occurs.
John, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, so looking at geography at both macro and micro level, if we look at it from a macro level in terms of, I touched on it earlier on, in terms of talent and how talent We have to chase the talent, and whether it's talent in the widest sense, in a country level where we have high levels of education, so that we can actually chase the talent and get the talent we require. That is driving our geography, although we have to balance up against the, as you say, the cluster effect. There is benefit to be with other people who are looking for that. There is a disadvantage, and eventually, knowing where you are in that market cycle so that you can predict where you're going is an important aspect. On the micro level, again, it goes back to talent, it goes back to technology. You talk about connected urban environments. We are a technology organisation. There's an enormous amount of technology investment, and technology people don't want to be in the traditional centres for banking. Canary Wharf, while it's a very dynamic environment, pales in twisting significance in terms of a good destination for technology people when you compare it to the King's Crosses of this world and so forth. And I think we've got to balance up exactly what business we are in, and then how do we tailor our real estate need to actually both attract that talent and retain that talent. And those are some of the dilemmas that we're facing, because obviously we're doing it with a relatively inflexible market, commodity to chase a very flexible commodity. And it's really squaring that circle is always going to be a challenge for us.
And just on that Canary Wharf thing, it's an interesting observation that was made, which is this whole CBD versus community urban environment. And I think it's fair to say that places like London, Singapore, Hong Kong, New York will continue to be centres of excellence for the banking sector and the financial sector. Here, Canary Wharf has really stolen the march on a lot of the city because its ability to build big buildings, which we're in today. I think if you talk to Canary Wharf Group, they would look at this campus, this whole campus we're in, and say that actually the next 10 years for it is a pretty critical time, because actually it's not the CBD, and it's a great place, but it's quite sterile as far as Generation Y is considered. And therefore that's why they're going out and about to create levels like here at level 39, but also Wood Wharf, which is the next part of the whole development of Canary Wharf, is going to be virtually nothing to do with offices. It's going to be to do with training, universities, education, quirky residential, quirky retail, which won't feel like the Churchill Place Plaza, which is just a big shopping centre in a very sterile environment. So I think Canary Wharf have realised that actually they need to create this as a community urban environment alongside King's Cross and other great successes that have taken place. The question was raised earlier by Monica, or I think even a great architectural presentation, which is why Australia? Why is this happening in Australia? Why have we got someone from Australia and someone from New Zealand all the way around the world to tell us? Why are they telling us what they're doing and why is it better? Well, I think I'll have a stab at answering that question, because I've debated it for about 6 months actually, being slightly annoyed by it, I suppose. We came up probably with two conclusions, and they may be completely wrong. But the first conclusion was that in Australia, it's a long way away, as is New Zealand. And actually, to attract the best talent, you need to create the best environment. And if people in Australia want to go to the best places, but they're less likely to travel elsewhere. So you've got a defined amount of people coming in Australia, and therefore the big four banks have had to really work hard to attract the best talent. Here in London, we have the ability to attract talent from Paris. It's only 200 miles away. Whereas in Australia, it is just a very big place, a long way away. And I think that's the same in New Zealand. I also take the second stab at why it's happening in Australia, which is actually banks didn't go through the same problems as they have done here in the West. And certainly, I think it's fair to say that in 2007, 2008, when panel members here were hunkering down for the next 6 years, it was exactly the time when Macquarie and NAB and Westpac and ANZ and Commonwealth were not having real troubles, but certainly were in a better position than the banks in the West. And they took that opportunity, along with some good lease expiries, etc., to develop something different, a very open, collaborative type culture, alongside the need in Australia to be a long way away, and alongside the fact that the financial markets are slightly different in terms of their cycles, has meant, I think, that's why we're hearing from great examples from Australia and New Zealand today. So that's my stab at that, why that is. And then, Monica, we can perhaps catch up on that later. The fifth factor, the final factor, what's driving the banking sector, the future of the financial workplace, is talent. Now, we've got Primo, we've got James. We're going to have to talk to you about this, because this is all about creating the great space to attract the best talent. And we've kind of covered it off already in so many ways. We've got 4 generations of the workforce. We know that the millennials will make up 50% of the workforce by 2020. Primo, first of all, yourself, in the report, interestingly, it's got, I think this is a really critical point, it's got a table that lists the most admired companies in the world. I think it's the most admired, or it's something like that. And interestingly, if you looked at that table 10 years ago, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Citi, RBS would all been there, whether it's in UK, Europe, America. In the UK at the moment, there's one financial services company in that top 10 list, and this is the Great Places to Work, so very, very linked to yourself. Interesting, number 1 great place to work this year, according to this survey, is Capital One in the UK. So what you're doing in America is affecting the UK, which is great. But unfortunately for you, in America, Capital One doesn't exist. So, but it's all about the tech. So I'm interested in how you are going about your work and sitting down with the CEOs and saying it's about attracting the best talent. And what, I mean, we've seen great pictures, but what fundamentally is different about what's happening in San Francisco? What should we learn?
Actually, kind of to comment this Canary Wharf, you can actually reference the financial district, because that was professional services, largely banking, Bank of America, Walmart. There was a ton of banking, and it sort of reshifted. And a lot of it is because the cost and the talent. So what I can say in the Bay Area, we're preparing for the millennials coming into the workplace. So this whole concept of this agile workspace, the workplace topologies, is to deal with this new group of workers. But we still need to take into consideration the workers who are in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So we have multi-generational office space that needs to speak to every different work type. So I think what we're seeing is that in professional services, they realize it's coming. And to get that talent, they're going to have a space that speaks about who they are, what their philosophy is, because the millennials they work for a paycheck, but they also want to get behind something. So the space can have very aspirational, can be very inspiring, and talk to a culture, can talk to a philosophy of the company by just the decisions you make. So what we recommend to CEOs, what we recommend to entrepreneurs is that it needs to be reflective of the brand and the philosophy and the culture that you're trying to create. We talk about workforce anymore, we talk about creating community and fostering community. So these workspaces, they become the brand, they become the story of what you're about. So whether it's professional services or a tech company, it can be many different types of companies, but it needs to speak to what they're about. Otherwise, the millennials will take a job somewhere else. Yeah. And the talent engineer in San Francisco last 2 days, they're making 6 figures out of the gate. They'll move their job 3 or 4 times, and they'll be making 25, 50, but they'll be making big jumps because they can. And we have the investment community in that area. We have the technology companies. I think the same thing's happening in Europe. I think these are both like gateway to, we go to Asia, you guys handle Europe, the money's here, the urban core, everybody's moved out of the valley and come to San Francisco. All the buildings that were owned by big financial institutions, the rents are being paid by tech companies. They're paying we're getting Manhattan prices in San Francisco. So it can kind of show you how real estate can shift. So, and it's a very easy argument, because a compelling argument to a CEO that I can fit 100 more employees, changing to this desk size. Yeah. You can stay there through lease term. So it's a very easy financial argument to make as well.
Tim, just putting sort of some figures on the choice program and what you've done, because yours started off as a very much a visionary of making the best space, and then it went into a cost saving, and now it's about talent and cost saving and making the best space. So how that journey, where are you, and what are the statistics to help back up our story?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started out very much as a cost agenda back in 2006. You know, like a lot of organisations, kind of people wandering around our buildings realising they're half empty. And so that was very much the kind of first stage of the evolution, but it's kind of tracked what has been said around tracking the technology, so it's evolved over time of people being able to be more distributed. So we have about 25% of the population that are able to work in a flexible way. And we've seen the evolution of some different thinking from our human resources colleagues in terms of understanding that actually the financial services isn't as attractive to new graduates as it has been before. I think interestingly, just to answer part of your question around why I think Australia has taken such a leap, and I kind of sit here feeling very humbled by what I've seen today, and very much set the benchmark. But I remember also being out in Australia working, and the studio director, because I was a designer at the time, coming over and taking my pen away at about 3 in the afternoon on a Friday and saying, we're going to the pub. And I think that kind of sense of the lifestyle and the work style blending together, I think, has quite a key impact. So the direction we're going in is thinking about the kind of workspaces we create. There is a huge cost agenda, and trying to balance and get the investment to provide the right spaces for people, plus also engineering and getting that Daily Mail question right, which is it needs to be done on the back of some consolidation. It's a balance, and it's a very tricky balance to run together. We're also kind of seeing the importance of other agendas across the organisation, such as health and well-being, the diversity and inclusion agenda, because actually, successful companies mirror, as Monica said, they mirror their customer base. So you need a diverse organisation to mirror your customers. And those agendas specifically in the workplace, in terms of how we accommodate people, the types of environments that we create, are particularly important.
To add to that, I think, from seeing all the Australian banks, I think one of the things I've noticed is they are much more adventurous with their technology. They've aligned it much better to the needs of their workforce and the next workforce. Almost every case study we've talked about enables thousands of people to carry laptops and connect wirelessly. So you have everyone with a laptop, so does CBA. Macquarie told me that they've just opened their new investment banking building in Martin Place. Everyone has an iPhone 6. And they'll use that for work and a whole range of new things. Whereas I talk to banks here and elsewhere in Europe, it's can't do laptops, security, no wireless, have to have a thin client. What's your thought on that, and how does that resonate?
Yeah, certainly there was a concern and a risk profile, if you like, that came up when the proposition was, if we want to go down this path, you need to enable people with mobile technology. So a whole process went through to it, but if you look around the global market, there are case studies where it was being used. So there was a way where you, with the right protocols and processes and compliance training and all of that, you could minimise the risk of doing that. So gradually the acceptance was that isn't in place, and training and checking in on how confidential information, how information was being shared, is done all the time. So it's not something that is forgotten, if you like, that is still there, that is checked in to make sure that there's not going to be any breaches or any risk in the future. But I probably should also say that other industries have taken on flexible working in different ways as well. So certainly the professional services firm, Fairfax Media, marketing, so it's permeated other industries as well. And they've tailored, if you like, how they've worked around those security issues.
The challenge for the market just occurred to me. How do we move into a more co-working environment, which is clearly what we've heard for the last 24 hours, if people take away the laptop or the device and make it a thin client? It seems that that's counterintuitive to what we're hearing in the market, so there's something to be thinking about. James, in terms of New Zealand and ASB Bank, what's...
By the way, I'm not from New Zealand.
I know
New Zealand is
I know
the
you're not from New
Australians tell them
Zealand.
how to do things.
No, I know. We have the same. There's no Canadians and Americans, so we should be right. So just in terms of ASB and what they use the building for in talent, we heard from the chief executive on the video, but it was, and she said it's much more open, all that sort of good stuff. But Monica gave some real hardline figures of happiness and productivity and all that sort of stuff. The holy grail, 16% productivity. We'd love to know how that was measured. But in terms of ASB, what sort of, after a year or 6 months, when they come back to you and say, well, they say fantastic and it's done something, what would be the one thing it's done? Has it attracted more talent? Has it created
they moved from a high-rise into that building. They moved from a high-rise building, and so it's radically created a culture because there was no culture in the high-rise building. So You can't measure that, of course, but you can sort of smell it in the air. That's one thing. The other thing is that anecdotally, they have become much more collaborative as an organisation. They jumped from desktop to tablet to iPhones, all sorts of things, in one go, and so they became very agile as an organisation overnight. So anecdotally, it's been extraordinarily successful for them. Having said that, that's the third building in a row we've done for them since 2000. So we've been taking steps to get to that point. So they're a very educated, articulate, and quite intellectual client. They're this big from the Commonwealth, which is enormous. So they're actually part of the Commonwealth, and so they're highly literate in workplace. If I could just say, in answer to your question about Australia, and I think there's two things. One, Australians are naturally cynical, which means that you question anything that's put in front of you, which means you question anything to do with workplace whatsoever. Secondly, Lend-Lease practically rewrote the entire Australian corporate history, and the original guy from Lend-Lease, his name was Dusseldorp, was a Dutchman, and when we go to the Netherlands and we look at workplace and so on, which is where Veldhoven and Co come from, there's actually a very interesting affinity between the Netherlands and Australia in a corporate sense, especially in a workplace sense. And although Lend-Lease doesn't do the same thing here, Lend-Lease is actually responsible for changing corporate culture very much in a project management sense, which says, I will question anything you say to me. So workplace has been a perfect vehicle for them to infiltrate the banks, which is why banks have then turned into this very leading proponent of workplaces. The first building that we in fact did for the National, which is now 10 years ago, was a Lend-Lease initiative to take the bank from culturally dreadful place into a new culture. And so I think Lend-Lease has got one company, interesting. We're only the size of London, remember that, or maybe a little bit bigger, but it's a small thing, and when you get a strong, evocative leader like that, you can make enormous change to a culture, a national culture.
Wow. Well, there's the real answer, rather than the slightly more subjective one I came up with. But so it's about the landlord.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Very good.
Always is.
Always that landlord. Okay. So just I'm conscious of time, and I think we've probably just got 10 minutes, and we haven't even predicted anything yet. So that's crazy. So we've kind of talked about the 5 forces. Some of them are push forces, some of them are pull forces. They really want to talk about the 7 key predictions, and I think what we might do is quickly rattle through these and ask people for their things. So the building walls, the prediction on building walls, the separation, the regulation, what's going to happen, is that, and I'll sort of answer this one and move on, which is we see around the world from interviewing different banks that different banks interpret the same rules very differently and deliver very different results. So I implore anyone out here who's advising financial services companies to look at the most radical in terms of the way it's referenced to regulation and governance, and try and work out how they've done it. As I said, there's a bank currently running around London that has read the rules in a completely different way. They're running around London looking for space, and they are demanding that every single floor, they're going to have to split the canteens and the cafes up because of regulation. Now, you go to Macquarie's building in London, there's none of that, yet they're the same bank in the same city, reading the same book. And for those of you, our French colleagues here, I always refer to it as the difference between us reading the rules about the EU and the French reading the rules about the EU. They're the same rules, we just interpret them differently. So there's definitely interpretation that's going to be a key in terms of how we look forward. I think in the financial services sector, gone are the days when we take on, the banks take on, the financial services sector take on 50, 100, 200 more people, and therefore they take on 5,000, 10,000, 2,000, 200,000 square feet. The property-free expansion is kind of here, and we're looking at all sorts of new models. And if we look at this, look at the on the left here. Could you just part the way just there, just to see the thing here? This is a quick, very simple diagram. Basically shows on the left-hand side here. Those are the banks with no presence at all, no physical presence, all online. And then on the right here, the traditional banks, the Royal Bank of Scotland and the HSBCs, who have a very, very heavy physical presence. Interestingly, what we've seen is there's a huge area in the middle that people have started to fill. You know, the fintech industry has filled it, and Philip's already talked about it, the challenger banks, the Metros and the Virgins. What are they doing? They're offering different things. A lot of this is in the retail side of workplace, and I make no apology for that, but it's definitely how the banks are expanding, or there's new banks emerging, but it doesn't have any effect on real estate, and I think that's the key thing. In terms of number 3, urbanility rules. The future of horizontal high-rise, we've heard about it 10 times already. Google's new headquarters, basically the Shard on its side on 3 floors, is basically a horizontal high-rise, and they're here to come. PwC, when they look at space, now won't look at floors less than 30,000 square feet per floor. That seems to be what the banks are looking for. They used to look for it, and traditionally the banks used to look for it just for trading. Now we're seeing it completely being the driver for everything they do. And the point about urbanity is, where is going to be the next CUE, not the next CBD, the next CUE. Banks seem to be wanting to follow the tech companies and follow the community urban environments. The rules seem to be about residential, universities, quirky retail, and a vibrant and great locations in terms of transport, and you could look at King's Cross for that. New kids on the block. I'll just ask Philip actually just to comment, having just been, you can come back in now, John. You can come back in. Young talent wants to work in vibrant cities. I just think it's really interesting how the banks are going to have to change to attract this talent, and we're really seeing a more innovative approach and the requirement for that. Do you have anything you want to just comment on that?
Well, I think we have many banks around the world that they're becoming technology companies in their own right. With maybe 30% plus of the workforce being in technology, and therefore I think, as Primo said, they're competing with talent, with other tech firms who are employing engineers and others. So it interests me as to how the banks here and others have responded to that, because tech talent can go anywhere, whether it's Amazon, Google, or a bank. And I think the other thing which interests me to maybe comment on is that we've also heard about opening up, workplaces here to be more permeable. So a co-work space in a ground floor of a bank headquarters is unheard of, really. But that's about bringing talent in, isn't it? Engaging with talent in the community. So that, I think, would be interesting to have a comment about how you've enabled no security on the ground floor, whereas you go down to the ground floor here, and there's plenty of security. So let's have a little debate about that, because that really is about how talent kind of permeates into an environment.
It is about the retail model, though. What our buildings, and we just don't work for banks, what our buildings do is blur the line between retail and commercial. So those buildings, and Monica's buildings are the same. They're about cafes and funky spaces and whatever. The ASB, for example, had an aspiration that you really didn't know where the front door was. You kind of permeate through this experience and you come to it. And I think that's indicative of a comment yesterday about reinventing the high street by co-working. I think that's where we're headed, where retail, not old-time retail, new retail, is the front door to things.
So, in terms of your great example, the elephants in the room for people sitting in the UK, security, cleanliness, the way it feels, just what happens at night, all that sort of stuff. Just how you overcome the whole sort of security piece in terms of you can't do that, technology, wireless. I mean, there's 1,000 things. How can you just press a button and it all happens?
Yeah. Our biggest test was, and you perhaps can't relate to this, but with Collingwood, AFL football playing the stadium, we were like, that was going to be the biggest test. If the crowds would come and weren't going to impact that building, that tick, it was a safe building. But look, I think it was, the security is there. So I think it's a sophistication of security. And it is a change in how the facilities are being maintained. So we do have tourists and people who get lost in the building. And we had that in Sydney as well. We had American tourists somehow got to the high rise of the Sydney building and saying, I hear you got great views of Sydney Harbour here. So they get through. So of course the security is there like it is in the bank, and the security team are on guard the whole time. So they're scripted to come out. They can identify those who might be lost or might be of concern and literally just engage with them and steer them out. Touch wood, we've been open for now a year and we haven't had an incident yet. And I think the facilities management, absolutely you need to change how you maintain and monitor the premises, because it does get worked as hard as the public space. So you need to factor that into the cycle and make sure that you're maintaining it to a certain level. And the reason of why is it is the retail piece. We're serving the customer base. How do you know what the customer wants if you don't talk to them at a really basic level? And that's really the realisation that that was time to open the doors, and one of things more give, less take, and they want to be authentic on how they actually had proof points around how they actually do that.
So John, obviously with Citi, you're sitting on quite a lot of legacy property, and therefore the ability to change is not quite as there. But in a funny way, you're building even here is, you could argue that you've got retail below it, it's the Canary Wharf retail, and all NAB have done is they've created that Canary Wharf retail into their own home and made it feel like a community environment. Have you got any examples around the world where you will be adopting a sort of more open approach?
It's actually interesting, and you're right, part of the problem is legacy. One of the good things about moving 50% of your staff into our CSEs is that we're having to build that infrastructure. So we can start from a blank sheet of paper and get the benefits that you can get from agile types of working, more inclusive and open styles of working, because it can be cost effective in those circumstances. To do it retrospectively has always been the challenge, and has meant that we started with that driver, and that's why we were successful to begin with. We're now realising that it's very much part of a cultural change that we have to champion, and with that cultural change comes the benefits of cost. So we're doing that. We have something like 52,000 seats under construction at the present time, all within a working and agile environment, primarily in our new locations. And if you look at what we've done in Shanghai, for instance, we opened a recent centre in Shanghai. And again, I would agree with entirely that the FM world, which is part of my remit, has to change with it, because the traditional way we've approached that is totally outmoded when you're talking about much more flexible working space. Those are the way in which we're approaching it. Will we ever be able to go back and address some of the legacy side? Yes, we will have to, but it's going to become more of a challenge. And I think that's much more of a bigger cultural change, because I think one of the, whether it's the pub culture or whatever, the cultural will to change is a key thing. It's been able to manage that cultural change is our biggest challenge, particularly in some of the more established markets.
So Tim, do we see that Sir Fred's legacy of Gogarburn is going to be open up to the public next week?
No, great question. I mean, and you kind of make a great point around the kind of legacy, because historically there's been a need for consistency. So our offices, you could walk into our London office and it would look exactly the same as somewhere in Singapore, indeed the US, and we were kind of importing filing cabinets with air inside them across the world to create the consistency. And I think, back to this point about what younger people want, they want that kind of vibrancy, they want that difference of space, but also they want to buy into the culture of the organisation. And I think it's a challenge, and we had this debate on the panel yesterday morning around, how does an organisation surface its culture through the workplace? How does it create that kind of brand that people can see? But I think there is a real need to think about how we interact with our customers, being more transparent as an organisation and bringing those customers in, and some kind of great examples about how to use the branch network and open that up to entrepreneurs and for our customers to access that space, and indeed for them to interact with our colleagues as well. So I think the kind of direction is to be to create that porosity. I think you talked about, which is a kind of great phrase in terms of how we create these connections both within our buildings for our people and how they connect together, but also how we connect with our customers as well.
And finally, Primo, I mean, we're basing this this openness on a model that's come out of the Southern Hemisphere. Are we right to be basing it on that? Is it coming from San Francisco as well? I mean, if you 10 years ago went around the Google headquarters or Oracle or eBay, they were quite shut off places, huge campuses, but they certainly weren't open to the public. They're obviously all moving in town now. In the new designs, are you creating similar designs to NAB and ASB?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The bank that we did for Capital One, the barista will also give you a car loan. So the teller line is gone. So they're like kind of changing the game of banking. So it's less formal, it's less I'm over here, you're over there. They actually will, it's kind of a social meeting. So that's kind of a new way of thinking. In the workplace realm, I think, you know, I'll tell you, I saw open workplace in Europe like 20 years ago. So we are not the inventors of open plan. It all came from here. We just took it, I think we took it into America, into tech, which is an early adopter anyway. And they found it, startups like that vibe, they like that energy, they like that closeness, and they found it easier to get on the same page when they're all in the open plan. So I think it's a big pivot that we're seeing across all markets, whether it's tech or professional services. It's just an easier way to work, but understanding that millennials work different than baby boomers, than Xers, so we need to make space that has that variety. So a lot of what you see in Australia, all these things that you've seen in these banks in New Zealand, these are things that I think they've been widely kind of adopted. The way they're being executed may be a little different in the West Coast, but I think they overall have the same thing. It's to build community. It's to create and to really sell what that company is about. The whole idea of what the brand is and being transparent in the workplace and in the lobbies. Zappos is a good example of how they made their lobby a community lobby. So there are a lot of tech companies realizing that we need to embrace the community. We just can't have our fortress and not be able to see what's happening in. So a lot of these campuses are being built by the community.
So it's happening everywhere. That's
Yeah.
good news. Okay, I've just had a 1 minute thing, so I've gone over that already. The mobile revolution, quickly talking about the fact that the mobile, and Philip's already talked about, the way we pay, way we use the fintech sector going forward will definitely drive a different way of working. One interesting fact, and I'll get it and I'll leave it then. So shaking up the bank structure, we've already heard mass middle market parts of the bank are now moving offshore, outshoring, nearshoring, right-shoring. Automation is here. 47% of all banks are predicted to be automated from where they are now by 2035. Remember that's going to have a huge effect on what we do. And finally, the omni-bank. The conclusion we came to is that the retail bank is not dead. A lot of people are trying to say it's dead. The reason it's not dead is for the second point there. Retail banking say there will be customer interaction. So actually what we will end up with is somewhere that banks will be able to talk and bring communities back in with their customers. And a lot of banks we advise, we're talking to them about effectively creating their bank branches back into as community hubs, almost village halls, where the banking is kind of surplus and ancillary, but it is a banking place, but you can do a lot of other things there as well. And so that's something that's definitely coming our way. Final just thought from me, which is that, and I'm not put a downer on it, but in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, there have been a huge amount of potential issues around people infiltrating the bank's data and stealing data and even stealing money. And it was put to us by a dinner I was at about 4 weeks ago with Price Waterhouse, where the head of their banking sector predicted that the next big industry crash, the next big thing that could happen in the industry is nothing to do with talent or Ebola or ISIS or anything else. Potentially it's to do with a 13, 14-year-old hacker getting into the private bank of Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan and withdrawing money at a 40, 50, 60 billion rate, and no one knows where it went. So actually, the technology is a great opportunity, but the banks will also be massively cautious. We don't physically know anymore where our money is, and that is a real sort of, it doesn't feel right. We used to know it was in the safe in the high street. We don't anymore, and I'll just leave you with the thought that actually potentially that threat of the hacker, not the hacker from MIT because they're being tracked, they know their code. It's the 13-year-old that hasn't gone to MIT yet that could break in and actually cause a complete revolution in it. So whatever we want to do going forward, technology will always be slightly restricted by the fact that we have this security governance risk that's going to stop a lot of what we do. I'd like to thank our panel for a very enjoyable session and, in the usual way, a round of applause. Thank you.